Alright, welcome back. Okay, so for anyone who knows, I was doing a series of videos called History on Countries. I do actually have a folder on my YouTube channel for it. I was taking a break because I got distracted by other things. The videos in the last few days will be the videos that I got distracted with, and there you go. So today's video is going to be the history on Japan. I like Japan. It's not my favorite country, my all-time favorite country, but it's a favorite. Okay, so it is widely accepted that the first human habitant in Japanese what? can be traced back to prehistoric times, the Jomon period, named after its cord-marked pottery, was followed by the Yayoi in the first millennium BC, when new technologies were introduced from continental Asia. During this period in the 1st century AD, the first known written reference to Japan was recorded in the Chinese Book of Han. Between the 4th century and the 9th century, Japan's many kingdoms and tribes gradually came to be unified under a centralized government, nominally controlled by the emperor. The imperial dynasty, established at this time, continues to reign over Japan to this day. In 794, a new imperial capital was established at Heian-kyo, modern Kyoto, marking the beginning of the Heian period, which lasted until 1185. Really? Hate when things automatically click. Okay, so the Heian period is considered a golden age of classical Japanese culture. Japanese religious life from this time and onwards was a mix of Buddhism and native religious practices known as Shinto. Over the following centuries, the power of the emperor and the imperial court gradually declined and passed to the military clans and their armies of samurai warriors. The Minamoto clan, under Minamoto no Yoritomo, emerged victorious from the Genpei War of 1180 to 1185. After seizing power, Yoritomo set up his capital in Kamakura and took the title of shogun. In 1274 and 1281, the Kamakura withstood two Mongol invasions, but in 1333 it was toppled by a rival claimant to the shogunate. I'm butchering these words. Sorry for anyone who's Japanese watching this, because I suck. Ushering in the Muromachi Period. During the Muromachi Period, regional warlords called daimyo. Oh my god. I'm butchering these words. I don't even know if I should be doing this video right now. Daimyo grew in power at the expense of the shogun. Eventually, Japan descended into a period of civil war. Over the course of the late 16th century, Japan was reunified under the leadership of the daimyo, Oda Nobunaga, again, butchering another name, and his successor. After Hideyoshi's death in 1598, Tokugawa came to power and was appointed shogun by the emperor. Okay, we're going to move on for a bit, because that's a little bit boring, and I'm tired of butchering names. So, the American Perry expedition in 1853 to 1854 ended Japan's seclusion, thus in turn contributed to the fall of the shogunate and the return of power to the emperor in 1868. The new national leadership of the following Meiji period transformed their isolated, underdeveloped island country into an empire that closely followed Western models and became a world power. Although democracy developed in a modern civilian culture prospered during the Taisho period, 1912 to 1926, Japan's powerful military had great autonomy and overruled Japan's civilian leaders in the 1920s and 1930s. All right, from 1937, the conflict escalated into the prolonged war with China. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 led to war with the United States and its allies. Japan's forces soon became overextended, but the military held out in spite of Allied air attacks that inflicted severe damage on population centers. Japan's unconditional surrender was announced by Emperor Hirohito on 14th of August 1945, following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Soviet invasion of Manchuria. I butchered that name again. The Allies occupied Japan until 1952, during which a new constitution was enacted in 1947 that transformed Japan into a constitutional monarchy. After 1955, Japan enjoyed a very high economic growth and became a world economic powerhouse. Since the 1990s, economic stagnation has been a major issue. An earthquake and tsunami in 2011 caused massive economic dislocations and a serious nuclear power disaster. Alrighty. That's a lot to read. Nobody said anything, you frickin'... Sorry, my thing's having a bit of issues, among other things. Alright, medieval Japan. Kamakura period, which is 1185 to 1333. Upon the consolidation of power, Minamoto chose to rule in consort with the imperial court in Kyoto, though Yorimoto set up his own government in Kamakura in the Kanto region located east of Japan. Its power was legally authorized by the imperial court in Kyoto on several occasions. In 1192, the emperor declared Yorimoto. I don't know what that means. Moving on before I feel like an idiot. Became to be used as a mean to mean a government headed by a shogun. The English term shogunate refers to the bakufu. Japan remained largely under military rule until 1868. Legitimacy was conferred on the shogunate by the imperial court, but the shogunate were the de facto rulers of the country. The court maintained bureaucracy and religious functions, and the shogunate welcomed participation by members of the aristocratic class. The older institutions remained intact in a weakened form, and Kyoto remained the official capital. The system has been contrasted with the simple warrior rule of the late Muromachi period. This seems incredibly boring. We're going to move on to the Heisei period, 1989 to present. Emperor Akihito's reign began upon the death of his father, Emperor Hirohito. The economic bubble popped in 1989, which is the year I was born, for anyone who cares. And stock and land prices plunged as Japan entered a deflationary spiral. Banks found themselves saddled with insurmountable debts that hindered economic recovery. Stagnation worsened as the birth rate declined far below replacement level. The 1990s are often referred to as Japan's lost decade. Economic performance was frequently poor in the following decades, and the stock market never returned to its pre-1989 highs. Japan's system of lifetime employment largely collapsed, and unemployment rates rose. The faltering economy, and several corruption scandals weakened the LDP's dominant political position. Japan was nevertheless governed by non-LDP prime ministers only in 1993 to 1996, and 2009 to 2012. Japan's dealing with its war legacy has strained international relations. China and Korea have found official apologies, such as those of the emperor in 1990 and the Murayama Statement of 1995, inadequate or insincere. Nationalist politics have exuberated this, such as denial of the Nanking Massacre and other war crimes, revisionist history textbooks which have provoked protests in East Asia, and frequent visits by Japanese politicians to Yasukuni Shrine, where convicted war criminals were enshrined. Legislation in 2015 expanding the military's role overseas was criticized as a war bill. In spite of Japan's economic disabilities, this period also saw Japanese popular culture, including video games, anime, and manga, became worldwide phenomena, especially among young people. On March 11, 2011, one of the largest earthquakes recorded in Japan occurred in the northeast. The resulting tsunami damaged the nuclear facilities in Fukushima, which experienced a nuclear meltdown and severe radiation leakage. In the 21st century, there have been increasing reports on the prevalence of sexlessness among the Japanese, including its byproducts such as a decreasing population. The social conditions. Social stratification in Japan became pronounced during the Yayoi period. Expanding trade and agriculture increased the wealth of society, which was increasingly monopolized by social elites. By 600 AD, a class structure had developed which included court aristocrats, the families of local magnates, commoners, and slaves. Over 90% were commoners, who included farmers, merchants, and artisans. During the late Heian period, the governing elite centered around three classes. The traditional aristocracy shared power with Buddhist monks and samurai, though the latter became increasingly dominant in the Kamakura and Muromachi periods. These periods witnessed the rise of the merchant class, which diversified into a greater variety of specialized occupations. Women initially held social and political equality with men, and archaeological evidence suggests that a prehistorical preference for female rulers in Western Japan. Female emperors appear in recorded history until the Meiji Constitution declared strict male-only ascension in 1889. Chinese Confucian-style patriarchy was first codified in the 7th and 8th centuries with the Ritsuyoro system, butchered that name, which introduced a patrilineal family register with a male head of household. Women until then had held important roles in government, which thereafter equally diminished, though even in the late Heian period, women wielded considerable court influence. Marital customs and many laws governing private property remained gender neutral. Apparently I can't speak today. For reasons that are unclear to historians, the status of women rapidly deteriorated from the 14th century and onwards. Women of all social classes lost the right to own and inherit property and were increasingly viewed as inferior to men. Hideyoshi's land survey of the 1590s further entrenched the status of men as dominant landholders. During the U.S. occupation following World War II, women gained legal equality with men, but faced widespread workplace discrimination. A movement for women's rights led to the passage of an equal employment law in 1986. But by the 1990s, women held only 10% of management positions. Hideyoshi's land survey of the 1590s, designated all who cultivated the land as commoners, an act which granted effective freedom to most of Japan's slaves. The Tokugawa shogunate rigidified long-existent class divisions, placing most of the population into a Neo-Confucian hierarchy of 4 occupations, with the ruling elite at the top, followed by the peasants who made up 80% of the population, then artisans, then merchants at the bottom, court nobles, clerics, outcasts, entertainers, and workers of the licensed quarters fell outside the structure. Different legal codes applied to different classes, marriage between classes was prohibited, and towns were subdivided into different class areas. The social stratifications had little bearing on economic conditions. Many samurai lived in poverty, and the wealth of the merchant class grew throughout the period as the commercial economy, development, and urbanization grew. The Edo-era social power structure proved untenable and gave way following the Meiji Restoration to one in which commercial power played an increasingly significant political role. Oh my God. All right. And although all social classes were legally abolished at the start of the Meiji period, income inequality greatly increased. New economic classes divisions were formed between capitalist business owners who formed the new middle class, small shopkeepers of the old middle class, the working class in factories, rural landlords, and tenant farmers. The great disparities of income between the classes dissipated during and after World War II, eventually declining to levels that were among the lowest in the industrialized world. Some post-war surveys indicated that up to 90% of Japanese self-identified as being middle class. Populations of workers and professions considered unclean, such as leather workers and those who handled the dead, developed in the 15th and 16th centuries into hereditary outcast communities. These people, later called burakumin, fell outside the Edo period class structure and suffered discrimination that lasted after the class system was abolished. Though activism was improved, the social conditions of those from burakumin backgrounds, discrimination in employment and education lingered into the 21st century. Alright, so there you have it. That is the history on Japan. And hopefully I will continue on with the histories of countries. Hopefully I don't get bored again. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and if you'd like, and if you're new here, and if you're watching this, please subscribe and like, and if you want me to do a certain country, let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time. Blessed be.